তোমার নামে কিছু
তোমার এইটাতে হবে না?
হ্যাঁ
জয়েন
আমি
করো
এটা
না এটা
এই
দিয়ে।
পোস্টারটা
জয়েন করতে পারবো না।
আরে এটা হেডফোনের জ্যাকটা গন্ডগোল এটাই তো।
তোমার সাথে বসে গেলে হেত্তেরিকে
লিঙ্ক কাকে পাঠাবে?
কি কে পাঠাতে হবে? লিখে দাও না। সেকেন্ড সেশন শেয়ার উইথ অল স্টুডেন্ট।
হুম। Hello everyone. From on behalf of Techno Engineering College Manipur Institute's Innovation Council, I want to welcome all of you and I want to wish a very good afternoon. We already had our first session with our wonderful speaker on intellectual property rights. This session, second session, will be on workshop on prototype, process design and development prototyping. And the speaker will be one of our college esteemed faculty, Mr. Pallab Nundi Chaudhary. Pallabda, can you hear me?
Yes. Should we start?
Yeah. Over to you, sir.
Yeah. So you have already attended a long session, very powerful session. So without wasting much time, we should come directly to the content itself. So the concept which we are going to discuss briefly today is prototype design. On behalf of Institute Innovation Council, TECB. So before diving into the main content, I will like to say a few words why such kind of thinking or such kind of thing, say prototype design, is important. It's because it is a part of entrepreneurship. So if you want to be a successful entrepreneur, then you at least need to know how to design a prototype for your business, for your product, whatever it might be. Why it is important and what are the different facets you need to keep in mind while designing the prototype. The starting point, what I must say is that before diving into the task of prototype design, one thing you need to keep in mind is that you cannot be a jack of all trades but master of none. That is a common proverb. You cannot be actually, although it is saying to be a master of something or some ideas, but the fact is that you cannot be master of everything. You can pretend that you are master of everything, but at the end, sooner or later, whether you are a budding entrepreneur or whether you are working for a startup company, sooner or later, if you pretend that you are master of everything, you will be caught. People around you will be able to understand sooner or later that either you are a dumbass or you are here because of nepotism. You have a strong family backing, something like that. And sooner or later, you will be kicked out of the business. So, if you want to be an entrepreneur, you have to be psychologically stable to understand that what are the things you need to have to be a successful entrepreneur, at least psychologically. And we at IIC, Institute Innovation Council, are trying to deliver the brief introduction of the different concepts which will be necessary uh, from time to time to be a successful entrepreneur. Prototype design is such a thing. So let's start. Uh, the first question that I should address is what is a prototype? A prototype is basically a tool, a tool to visualize an interactive design for your product. So The visual representation will demonstrate what the product is or product will do at any given point and what the interactive elements are and how the product would function in the real world. So you can see if you have followed what I've told in the definition. So prototype is basically a miniature version of your actual product, but it is not the actual product itself. You design something, you decide some kind of input which will be given to the prototype system, and you get some output from the system as we get or we do for all kinds of engineering products. But here the input and output are controlled, and input and output are fabricated in such a way that so that they resemble the real world scenario. So for example, if you develop a banking software like software, then you will create dummy accounts which will resemble the real accounts. You will create some kind of uh, dummy transactions which will take place over time, and you will check whether your system gets the desired output or not. So that is the brief idea of prototyping. So the next question is, why do you need to design a prototype rather than developing the actual system itself? If you have followed the starting point of our discussion, you are a budding entrepreneur or you are a startup, so you want to come up with some product, right? So at the end of the day, your product is something new which is not yet known to the society, known to the target customers, right? So why should they accept your product without looking or without having a feeling of the actual product itself? So prototype basically serves that purpose. So it is basically kind of visual or sensory stimulus which you can provide to the potential customers, your uh, potential patrons, etc., etc. So let we dive directly into the things which or the points which you need to keep in mind while designing a prototype. So the first point is make it real as much as possible. So before any prototypes are built, follow what I'm saying. You have not yet designed any prototype, right? But you have an idea, right, for the product. That means you have a picture of the product in your brain, in your mind. So until this point of time, the product is completely in the conceptual level, right? So that's fine. But eventually, to do some business with this, it must become something that stakeholders and users will be able to understand and appreciate. Right? So the prototype is going to be your first step in moving from conceptual to actual. So the success of your product or successful launch of your actual product will vastly depend on the fact how much real you can make your prototype. And the next point is you have to work a problem, right? So, uh, so this work a problem portion is a little bit tricky. So we all uh, at some point of time during our life, work on some kind of projects for our, say, uh, university assignment or some other competition, etc., etc. But what is the problem with those products or those projects, those prototypes? Basically, when you work on those kind of products, you actually don't try to solve any problem. You are providing a solution for something. That is fine. But what is the problem? Ask yourself. And if you can define the problem, then ask the next question. Is the problem realistic one, or is it a problem that needs an immediate solution? Right? So you have to be problem centered. So you have to work on a problem which you need to mitigate or which needs to be mitigated sometimes. So, for example, uh, COVID-19 situation, Zoom, Google Meet, as we are on Google Meet now. So, if you look into the product, Google Meet itself, it is basically a problem centric solution, right? So, the solution is not something which has come out of the sky. A problem surfaced, and Google tried to provide some solution to the problem the society is facing right at that moment. Then the third point is you have to iterate. So iteration is something you all know, at least mathematically, right? So here you have to extend the concept of iteration to the logical or philosophical level. Why? Because if you look into any engineering product, they have not come out of the factory suddenly. They came in stages. Similarly, prototyping comes in or should come in stages. But the end result is the same. And what is the end result? To evolve your ideas. So you have a mental sketch. So that mental sketch you draw on a paper. That means you are iterating over the sketch thing over and over on different surfaces, different platforms. Then the paper sketch you should translate to the digital platform using the standard tools so that you can get help from like-minded people who want to work on the same idea. If you want help or expert help from others, then there must be a way so that you can convey your idea to those experts. And that message which you want to convey, you can represent in the formatted way only by this iteration. By iterating over the sketching thing over and over on different platforms as per the expert. So here is an important point. Detect unintended scenarios. So when you want to deploy some real-time product, right? So some kind of unusual, unintended scenarios will surface which you cannot even imagine as of now. So you must be open to those unintended scenarios, or you must be able to conceptualize or ideate those unintended scenarios as much as possible while designing the prototype itself so that later on you can mitigate the maintenance problems. So that means you are working on the future limitations while designing the prototype itself, Next point goes like detect usability problems. So what is the usability problem? If you observe carefully, the end product has to be used by some kind of common people, right? So common people or your users are people who don't actually have enough engineering background in the rough sense, right? So when you uh, show a system to someone, for example, you have an automatic lathe machine which you have in your work in our PCB workshop. So what is the purpose of lathe machine? You, in the dumb sense, you provide a iron sheet into the machine and nuts and bolts come out of different shapes. But from the perspective of a novice or perspective of a common user, what is there inside the machine is a complete black, black box. He or she is not bothered about the functionality of the system itself. He or she is bothered only about the input. This input I will provide to the system and the final output, right? So this here comes the usability problem. How much your product is user friendly. So that challenge you need to uh, keep in mind or mitigate at least to a large extent while designing the prototype itself. And first, last and not the least, presentation. To launch your product and to do business with your product, you need funding, you need different stakeholders, right? So, prototype must be presentable as much as possible. So, to translate your idea to a full business, you need to go to some kind of incubation center. So, you can think of our discussion as if it is a pre-incubation phase where you can learn how to make your prototypes presentable to some incubator, right? If it is presentable, if your idea is sound, if your idea has all the capabilities to make money, then your incubation center will translate your concept to a business ready version. But before that, you need to make your prototype or idea presentable. So here we had some points which you need to keep in mind before working on the prototype itself. Next comes the big question, how to start the prototyping process. Just a second. How to start the prototyping process. So, the first thing while giving answer to this question, I must say is that I am not eligible to give an answer, straightforward answer to this question. Why? Because if you ask me how to design a prototype for a software problem, then at least I can come up with some idea. But if you ask me how to design a prototype for a mechanical product or a product which is related to mechanical engineering, civil engineering, or electronic circuit, then I cannot give you much idea about that. Now, how to start the prototyping process? You might have got the answer already. It will depend on the process itself or the product itself, type of the product, domain of the product, target customer, etc., etc. But something is common in all kinds of prototypes, and those common things you can get by answering some of the question. So some of the questions can go something like, what are the goals of the project? The first thing you need to ask yourself. So you have to start with the big picture. The problem, as we have discussed sometime before, you have to work on a problem, right? To be a successful entrepreneur. So, is the problem you are trying to solve is a real one, or do the problem really need a solution? So, such kind of questions or such kind of mind mapping, this is called mind mapping, you have to do within yourself. Then ask yourself the question, the product you are trying to develop or trying to deploy, how the product is going to solve that problem if there is a problem. Then you have to understand the product's utility, and it is critical. Understanding the product's utility is critical to deliver any sort of viable solution. So all these things you can conceptualize by having an understanding of the goals of your project. So if you have some well-defined, clear goals for the project, the next question you should ask, is there any competitive products in the same domain exists, or what competitive products do people currently use? Now, here it is a big thing which can put a big question mark onto your business, intended business. So if there are competitive solutions already, economic solutions already available in the market, then several other questions will arise out of this, such as, if I deploy a similar product for which there are alternative economic solutions already available, why people will invest money on my product? So if you can answer this question, then you can come up with some idea which will provide you an edge over the competitive products or already available in the market, or which can surface in the market later on. So next big question is, who are going to be your target customers, and what are their goal? Who is the audience, and who are their, or what are their goals? So understanding the user needs provide the context necessary to create products which will be targeted towards providing for those particular user types and fulfilling their needs. So this is basically a market oriented question which uh, you need to keep in mind, and by following which we should design your prototype. So for example, if you are trying to design some product or some audio visual product, such as uh, interactive board, learning tools, which are widely available, much popular nowadays. Then, if you are designing something for nursery kids, then the delivery will be something different. Because, and if you want to design some kind of learning tools for college students like you, or higher grade students who are reading in, say, matriculation or higher secondary standards, then you can see that the nature of audience, their perception about audiovisual learning changes drastically, right? So, with the change in nature of the audience, change in the goal of audiences also takes place. So, your prototype should follow your target audience, that means target consumers, and their goals. Because at the end of the day, people are not going to invest money, or people are not going to buy your product because you have developed something astonishing, something really of high standard. They will only purchase the product if they really need this. So you need to mitigate this point in your prototype as well, prototype design as well. So next big question. Now it is a little technical one. What is the type of the product? So if you already have set your goal, you have already identified your target audience and their goals, you have already identified the competitive products. Now you you must have some kind of clear cut idea about the type of the product or the type of the device you want to develop. Now, type of the product. So, just for example, if you want to develop some kind of software product, then type of the product is obviously software or virtual product. Then, what devices is it for? Your software can work on Android devices. Your software can work on Linux, Mac OS, Windows operating system. So that is basically the platform. So on the other hand, if you want to design some kind of mechanical product, then will the mechanical product is going to be a standalone product, or will you fit it inside a car, motorcycle, heavy vehicles? So those are basically this device thing, which you need to decide beforehand, because your prototype should fit the device onto which your product is going to work itself. Then are there any visual precedents you have to follow? So this can be thought of as a constraint which you should mitigate. How? Let we think of an example. Our computer cabinets are basically a cube-like structure, right? Now, can you fit your motherboard inside a sphere? Yes or no? You can fit your motherboard inside a sphere as well. But if you want to come up with some kind of new computer product, you will try to follow the already established convention. Why? Because if you follow the already established convention, if the product is already there in the market, then what happens? You see, it will be easier to connect to your potential consumers, at least psychologically. So This is basically visual precedent which you have to follow. And the last point should be, what are the deliverables, right? So when you show the prototype, if the product is something sought after, it will create some kind of expectation about deliverables, right? In the minds of the consumers. So the design thinking behind the deliverables, you can call it design thinking, critical thinking, mind mapping. So design thinking behind the deliverables becomes critical for your planning and workflow so that you can match up to the expectations of your consumers. Now, every product is different. So the nature of the deliverables will also be different. But if the deliverables are when defined, then the rest of the design process has a higher chance of going smoothly. If you can ideate something about the deliverable inside your brain, it will be easier to draw on the surface. So these are the points from where you should start the prototyping process. And next thing is you have to draw your prototypes, or you have to design your prototypes, whatever you call it. So while drawing or designing the prototype, actual prototype, as we have already discussed, it is highly project specific. So some points which you need to keep in mind or should be there in your prototype can go like, uh, you should define the user flow mechanism in your prototype. So user flow means how the user will interact with the system and how, after the processing has been done inside the black box, at least how the user perceives this, will get the output out of the system. Or in other words, by defining user flows, see how the users meet their goals by using your system and how the users interact with the system. Then you should incorporate some kind of mechanism so that you can identify information entities in your system so that later on you can scale up or upgrade your product. Now, when each user will interact with your prototype, they will provide some input and get some output. Identify the inputs and outputs, right? So by gathering those data, you will be able to know something about the user behavior or consumer behavior, user expectations, what are the most frequent interactions, etc., etc. Then you have to uh, do your initial sketches. So after you have got an idea of who will use the system, so here basically who is the audience and what are their goals. After you have a clear-cut idea about who will use the system and what they are going to do, and it is time to see how you can sketch your system or how you can sketch your user flow. So when you draft your system for the first time, you actually don't need to be much grammatical. Just jot down everything, every functions, whatever comes in your mind. Then when you have the first sketch is there on a sheet of paper, then create the structure itself. Now you have to follow the uh, actual grammatical rules as per your project. So first you have to uh, identify the user flows. Then you have to study the information entities from the prototype. They should not be amalgamated in one place, I believe. So these 2 points are basically something which you will use during the lifetime of the product. And then you have to draw the first rough sketch of the product. Then you have to sketch the structure. Either using pen and paper or using some kind of tools such as AutoCAD, MATLAB like things, Simulink. So uh, these are the basic ideas which you need to keep in mind while designing the prototypes for your intended systems. So 4 steps, at least I think, you can summarize in 4 steps, you can summarize the whole concepts. You have to create a concept sketch. Then you have to develop a virtual prototype before investing in some physical materials. Then you have to build a physical prototype. Then you have to locate manufacturer. So these are the 4 steps to build your product's prototype. So I think you have got some idea about what are prototypes, how you can employ or how you can design your prototype in the design thinking way. Now, how you can put these ideas into actual practice, because unless and until you do some practice, you will just a second, have no idea about this point. You will not be able to detect unintended scenarios. What unintended scenarios might arise while designing a prototype. For that purpose, from IIC TCB, we are encouraging you to apply these concepts in the upcoming Tectronics 2021. How you can do this in the Tectronics TechFest event of our institute. Most of you are going to come up with some project models, right? So while designing the project models, just try to replicate your project in the following sequence. So what I mean to say is that when you are delivering the project or showing the project, imagine that your spectators are common users. That means your project must have some kind of context description. In system engineering, we call it context diagram. So design the context diagram or context description in such a way that by looking at which a common user can easily understand how he or she should interact with your model. So by doing this, basically what happens, you see, just a second, you will be able to detect the usability problem, right? Then, uh, in the next point, uh, you should have some predefined input for your system. So, if this is your project, you must already create a domain from where the possible inputs can be given to the system and check if you are getting the desired output from the corresponding input or not. By this way, you will get some kind of feedback about the uh, about how your iteration step should go like. Then you can do one thing. You have already attended a uh, session on intellectual property, right? So try to jot down what intellectual property issues have to be mitigated if you want to deploy your prototype or product in the real market environment, right? Hope this makes sense. So along with this, in the upcoming Tech Fest, I think you should define the goals of the project. Then you should try to study and jot down, figure out the competitive products which people are currently using, if there are any. Then who are going to be your target customers and what are the customer needs, and are the needs are justified or not. Then try to justify the visual precedents you have followed and try to make a design on paper of the final deliverables. So, what will be the ultimate benefit by doing like this? By if you follow this convention, you will get a clear idea about how to design a prototype and how to represent that prototype to an incubation center if you want to uh, convert or translate your idea to a business model. So, yes, that is what we had to say in the prototype design discussion. So, I believe I'm already done from my side. So, I should hand over. Anurag? Hello? Hello?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I'm done from my side. So তোমাদের দিক থেকে কোনো কোশ্চেন থাকলে
Yeah,
বলতে পারো আপাতত। হ্যাঁ।
I can. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay. So if you have any questions, then please ask in the chat board or you can directly ask.
Prince, are you here? No, Prince নেই।
No.
Is there any student from the TechFest committee?
In the meantime, I have an announcement regarding feedback form. Those who have attended the first session and the second session, you will get your feedback form latest within tomorrow morning. Okay, you don't have to worry about it. You will get your feedback form in the mail in your Gmail address, the address in which you used to register for this session. After filling up the feedback form, you will get the automatically generated certificate in your mail. You will receive the certificate after filling up the feedback form. You will receive the feedback form within tomorrow morning in your registered email ID. So you need not to worry about it. So apparently nobody is asking any questions. So Pallabda, with your permission, can we move on to the vote of thanks?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, so today we completed two sessions. First one was on intellectual property rights, and now this one is on product design and prototype designing. And I want to thank, first of all, I want to thank Mr. Pallab Nandi Chaudhary for this wonderful session. And then I want to thank every participants for the to make it successful. On behalf of Techno Engineering College Banipur Institute's Innovation Council. A good day to all of you. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. May I leave?